America holding its breath as Hurricane Irma bears down on Florida. The now Category 2 storm packing lethal and catastrophic. Welcome to the Fox Report. I'm Sandra Smith. Bill Hemmer is in Orlando.
Hey, Sandra, good evening to you and welcome as our coverage continues here on the Fox News Channel. We are in Central Florida and now we're starting to feel the bands of Irma, still a strong Category 2 storm as it works its way up north up the coast. Big concern for Tampa this hour. Big concern for Orlando. Big concern for Fort Myers, Florida, too, as that storm comes on shore and moves further north. A tornado warning issued in the past 30 minutes for the Orlando area, so that is something we're keeping a very close eye on. We were warned about it. They have come and gone throughout the afternoon, a couple times, in fact, here in Orlando, as we continue to track all of that as Irma marches further north. Adam Klotz now, our meteorologist back at the Weather Center, starts us off this hour with the very latest on what Irma is doing now. Adam, good evening to you.
Hey, good evening there, Bill. Here's what we're looking at as we continue to watch Irma slowly work its way up the state, getting closer and closer to that Fort Myers area. But pay attention to everything you're seeing to the north. These bands of very heavy rain, very strong winds are continuing to lift, and we're going to start to see more severe weather moving towards the Tampa area, towards where you are in Orlando. And that's been the case so far. It's only going to intensify. You just mentioned the tornado threat. It's across the entire state, but where you're going to see the most activity and where we've seen the most activity so far is this front right quadrant. So you're getting there on the front right side of the storm. That is where we've seen some of this activity. A couple of tornado warned cells here in the last little bit. Now, typically when you get a tornado that's spawned because of a hurricane, these aren't long lasting, but still these are at least brief lasting serious weather, and you're getting right into the Orlando area. Either way, big thunderstorms working through with these very heavy rain, very strong winds as a result of all this as well. The winds have been really massive here in the last little bit as you're looking at the Naples area, seeing winds of 142 miles an hour now clocked. Several areas at 130 to 120. These winds still just as strong currently as we're beginning to watch this system move up the coast. And this is really important. I know a lot of folks think, hey, I'm on the west side of Florida. I need to really hunker down. But folks on the east side of Florida need to pay just as much attention. Take a look at this. Everything in this very defined red area, that is hurricane force winds, consistent. But everything in the orange area outside of it, that is at least hurricane force gusts. And that covers the entire state as we put this thing into motion. Here you are at 8 p.m., but we're going to make this thing move on up here in the East Coast. Orlando getting in that area where you're seeing hurricane force winds running you up to Gainesville. This will continue to weaken a little bit by tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon. We're talking about this stretching on up into Georgia. We'll still look at these very powerful winds stretching as far north as Atlanta before this thing begins to turn off. And when you're talking about this kind of wind, you're also talking about storm surge. That's going to maybe be the biggest story here as we head through the overnight hours. 15 feet, 5 to 10 feet in the Tampa area. And again, the storm surge on the west side of the state is going to be worse as soon as the storm passes you by. So it's not done as you're waiting for it. It happens once it leaves. Bill.
It's been a fascinating day to watch this. Adam, thank you very much in the Fox Extreme Weather Center. When you look at Adam Housley's reporting from earlier today down in the Keys, and you look at Griff Jenkins and others in Naples, Florida throughout the day, and one place taking a direct hit from Irma is the city of Naples. In fact, there's a live look right now. The National Weather Service predicting a massive storm surge there, stretching from, 10 to 12 feet high. Steve Harrigan's been reporting on the ground there for hours in Naples. And Steve, a bit of clearance right now. How is the damage that you and your team have seen so far?
Bill, from those sustained 130-mile-per-hour winds this afternoon in the city of Naples, it's clear that there is serious damage. Just how serious, just how widespread, it's really too early to tell at this point. From walking around during the eye of the storm, when it got a little bit calmer, we could see a number of large trees uprooted, smashed, some power lines down as well, and some flooding. The flooding is going to be the key story. Just how deep and how widespread is it? There were predictions of a storm surge of anywhere from 10 to 15 feet, a storm surge that could be sudden and deadly. So it's going to really take some time to assess whether or not that happened. But the damage from trees and to roofs is significant. We are not seeing major structures, though, crushed by the wind. We haven't seen that, and we have seen power outage for about 170,000 people. So It's going to be a tough night. There is help on the way from the Orlando area. That's where a lot of the first responders are going to be coming from. More than 1,000 vehicles, fuel convoys, medical convoys, and one of the key things to clear are roads to hospitals. People are going to need help. They're going to need to be transported to those hospitals. So clearing these down power lines, clearing these down trees is going to be key to a fast recovery and rescue operation here in Naples. Bill, back to you.
It's a remarkable thing, Steve, to see you there in Naples and see the tail end of this storm, because we're just getting the front of it now here in Orlando, several hundred miles to the north of you. What is next for Naples as you can assess it tonight?
There's a curfew tonight at 9 p.m. People are without power. We've seen more than 20,000 people go into shelters. A lot of people leave their homes. Officials are being clear at this point that it might look like things are better, but the danger is not over. And they are saying to people, do not return to your homes. There is a dangerous flood surge coming. So the danger, while not as obvious, not as visible, is still there, according to officials, telling people if you've left, if you've evacuated, it is still too early to come back home. Bill?
Wow. Steve, thanks. Steve Hurricane there live in Naples, Florida with us throughout the day and the evening tonight. 7:06 meanwhile here in Orlando. We too have a curfew that just went into effect moments ago, so we'll watch that throughout the night. Sandra, back to you in New York.
And Bill, all eyes on Tampa right now. Joining us by phone is Tampa Mayor Bob Buckhorn. Mayor, thanks for jumping on with us. Obviously a very busy moment for your city. You said earlier on in a press conference that for 90 years we have avoided this day. You followed that up with that day has come. What are you preparing for?
Well, obviously we're watching this storm as it progresses up the southwest coast. That video from Naples was just terrifying and awe-inspiring. Fortunately, it appears as though the storm has diminished somewhat, but we don't anticipate that that's going to remain the case. We are hopeful that it does, but we are planning for that type of weather here in the Tampa area. We are at the Emergency Operations Center. We obviously are going full throttle. Our police officers, our firefighters, our heavy equipment are staged so that when dawn comes, even though that will be the time of the surge, and that's also coinciding with a high tide here in Tampa, which will compound the surge, we'll be ready to go out there and try and clear those streets and get those power lines restored.
You have had some very strict warnings there and told residents what is coming. Did they heed those warnings?
You know, I hope so. We've been pretty relentless about it, and we have been very candid about what might occur if they don't. And so I think for certainly city residents, and I can't speak for the unincorporated Hillsborough County, but I think city residents in those low-lying areas are paying attention. They're aware of the potential damage. Many of them have boarded up their houses. My house, for example, my family has evacuated. So I think so, but then again, there will always be those who choose to ignore what we say and sometimes pay the ultimate price for it.
The last we heard from the National Hurricane Center, the eye of the storm was moving at 14 miles per hour, heading due north. By my calculation, Tampa is about 167 miles north of Naples. What are you expecting as far as timing as we look into the night?
Well, I think we're looking at the winds, which are already increasing, and the rain is ongoing as we speak. I think it will increase over the next couple hours. I think the bad time for us will be between 11 and 2 o'clock in the morning. The surge would occur later than that. High tides for us would be about 6 a.m. in the morning. And then I think the storm will keep moving. The key thing for us is that we remain on the good side of the storm. If that happens, then I think the surge will be far less than it would be if it veers westward and we're on the bad side of the storm. But at this point, and I say this literally knocking on wood, the track seems to keep it on the good side of the storm.
So let's talk about when the storm actually does hit. Earlier, you told residents do not call 911. Once the storm begins and once it makes land there and winds are over 40 miles per hour, at what point are you stopping your first responders from answering calls?
We already have. Police have been pulled off the streets because we've got sustained winds right about 40. If it abates, we will be back out on the street. But certainly Tampa Police Department is sheltering in place until that wind subsides.
Tampa Electric estimates as much as 60% of your city will be without power. How long do you expect the power outage to last, Mayor?
Well, TECO's been a great partner for us, and we work hand in hand with them. We're already seeing some sporadic power outages. Particularly concerning for me is some of them are occurring at some of our water and sewer plants. We have backup generators there that will get us through the next 2 days. But, you know, if the storm comes through at a Cat 3, then I think that's an accurate portrayal, and I think it will be days and in some cases weeks before that power is restored. I do know TECO has made arrangements for, you know, hundreds of additional linemen coming in from other areas that are not affected. But because of the depth of this storm and the fact that it encompasses the entire state, you can't slide down one side of the state that's not affected.
Tampa Mayor Bob Buckhorn, we really appreciate your time and jumping on with us tonight. We wish you and your family and your residents the best as this continues. Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mike Tobin, we're going to go to Bill.
Yeah, Sandra, that mayor has really been out in front of a lot of this action. But when he talks about 11 p.m. tonight, that's really when those stronger bands are going to roll through there. But he's not going to know if he's in the clear until tomorrow morning. And that was evident from your interview right there. So Tampa, what they did, they issued an indefinite curfew for anyone who did not get out. The mayor is saying people have to stay inside until the neighborhood is considered safe. And that may be tough for some. In Tampa just last night, we saw so many along the shoreline just trying to check things out. They were curious, and they did not want to leave, some of them. Mike Tobin's there live tonight now with more from Tampa tonight, about 80 miles to our west. Mike, good evening. How is it?
Well, as the Tampa mayor is saying, they're expecting the worst of this sometime after 10 o'clock, around 11 to 2 in the morning. We can see now that the rain is coming in as we're into the outer bands of the storm. And while I've still got this amazing visual, I want to show you this phenomenon here. We're looking into the Hillsborough Bay. It's one of the connected bodies of water to Tampa Bay. And you see all of that dry land out there. That is because of all of the water that is drawn back into the storm surge, this harbinger of what is going to come. Ultimately, the storm surge is going to push in this direction. And just because of the way Tampa Bay and the connected bodies of water are formed, when that water comes back in and comes back with such force, it's got nowhere to go. It's going to push up into the low-lying areas, into all the tributaries, and that's going to create the flooding effect that so many people are worried about, and that's going to happen after the wind event. But as long as we've got the rain and the wind coming in, I want to take you up here to the boulevard here, to Bayshore Boulevard, because then you can kind of get the visual effect of the sheets of rain that are now pouring in. I'm reluctant to say that you have flooding now because you've got water on the road, but that's water on the road that's a result of the rain that's coming in. That's not the flooding that has the authorities out here fearful. The flooding that everyone's talking about is what's going to come from this storm surge ultimately on Monday. So we're looking at the wind event coming tonight. Later on, as the wind is increasing, the barometer has been dropping steadily out here. You can see the trees blowing around. By and large, people are respecting the curfew and they're staying home. I see a few people out still curious, wanting to play out in the weather. For the most part, people are afraid of this storm. They saw what happened out in Texas. They're taking the warning seriously, and they're in their houses, and I guess we're standing by to see what happens next, Bill.
Yeah, that's our first big gust right here in Orlando, so it's coming your way, Mike, as well. Listen, you saw in Texas, you saw in the Caribbean, and just being there in Tampa last night, that city was empty. And I mean, they really listened to city authorities when they came out and said, take this thing seriously, and I know you have found out the same too. So, Mike, thank you. We'll be back with you live in Tampa throughout the evening here. You've got a number of counties and cities, including Orlando, that have issued these curfews. Right now, there's one in effect right here. Keeping people off the streets, but frankly, Orlando's been empty. John Mina is the chief of the Orlando Police Department. Sir, are you with me now, Chief? Good evening to you.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
How are things now with this curfew now in effect for you, and what are you hearing for your men and women?
Very few people out on the street right now. The curfew's in effect, so I'm hoping that people abide by that. And we know that some people, a very, very small percentage of people from the criminal element may try and take advantage of some closed businesses, but we're prepared to respond to that if necessary.
Yeah, I am amazed by the level of kindness and patience I have found in the people who live in this city over the past 3 days, Chief. You should be very proud of what your people have done so far and how they have listened to people like you as well. What has your observation been as you move through this storm tonight, knowing the worst of it is still to come?
Exactly that. This community was rocked by tragedy over a year and a half ago with the Pulse incident, and we responded with kindness and love. So again, that's what we're seeing here. It's a very resilient community. There was a call for blankets at one of the shelters earlier today, and within minutes, people were bringing blankets, and they had more than they needed. So just another great example of our wonderful community here in Orlando.
Yeah. Chief, we were given the news about 7 hours ago about the tragic death of 2 law enforcement officers in the state of Florida who were killed in a head-on collision in the middle of the night, one reporting to a shelter, one reporting for duty at that point. What information do you have as to how that tragedy occurred?
Just mostly what everyone else has. That people were going to work, and it was a head-on collision. Of our heroes have lost their lives, and it's unfortunate. The men and women in law enforcement, and corrections, and first responders, we know that we can't stay home. We have to be out and about, providing safety and security for everyone, and it's a very risky job, and that was evident today.
Yeah, it certainly is a challenge, and our thoughts and prayers and thoughts with all of them throughout Florida tonight. You're working 12-hour shifts. You got an A shift and a B shift, and you're switching on and off. Give us a sense of how the officers are holding up at the moment, Chief.
They're doing good. And actually, many officers will work more than 12 hours because once we get to a certain point, it's unsafe for them to transition and go home. So they'll kind of shelter in place for a little bit. But yeah, they'll definitely work more than their normal 12-hour shift. But we have several rotations that are in. So certainly double the amount of police officers on the street that we usually have. So that's why we're telling people don't be out there committing crimes because we have a lot of officers out there, and we'll catch you and put you in jail.
Yeah, we'll get that message out for you as well. One last question. The Salvation Army's been activated, 7,000 statewide. I think there were 30,000 outside of Florida that are on standby to come in when called. Do you interface with the National Guard? Do you work in tandem in any way? Or is it a separate operation at the moment?
We just know that they're available to us, and I was, briefed a couple hours earlier that of who to get a hold of and if they needed to be deployed. So we're in constant communication, and if needed, those resources can be deployed here. And I get the feeling that they'll be needed in other parts of the state, and not necessarily here in Orlando or Central Florida.
Well, we will see then. Chief, good luck. Okay, the curfew's in effect. It'll last for at least 23 hours, and we'll see how it goes together. Thank you, Chief, for getting the word out with us tonight.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Back to Sandra now in New York, and we'll let you know what's happening here in Orlando with that tornado warning and give you the status on that momentarily. Sandra.
Absolutely, huge concern there. Bill Hemmer, thank you. Meanwhile, the White House coming up with a game plan to help those affected by Irma. The latest response from President Trump and Vice President Pence. Next.
The people of South Florida, the people of the entire state should know we are with you. The President has directed the full resources of the federal government to be brought to bear to support the efforts of Governor Scott and state and local officials across Florida, and we will continue to do that.
Hurricane Irma launching a sustained assault on the state of Florida. The Category 2 storm is a monstrous 400 miles wide with winds hitting 110 miles per hour and gusts over 140. It's expected to retain its hurricane status at least until tomorrow morning. Joining us now by phone, Florida fisherman Captain Jeff Ballard. I understand you, Captain, are in St. Petersburg?
Yes, that's correct. We're at Madeira Beach.
Okay, and what are you riding this out on a boat?
Yeah, we're out here on the Florida Fisherman 2 down there at Hubbard's Marina, and we're riding it out on our vessel. The winds have picked up quite a bit, and the rain's coming down. We noticed a lot of water just leaving this path. It's just going out as lower than I've ever seen it. So the high tide is around 3 o'clock this morning, so we'll probably have a surge come in then.
In that case, what would you expect by way of the surge?
When the surge comes in, it really depends on where the eye of the storm is. If the eye is on the west of us, it's better off for us. But if it's on the east of us, it's better off for us. But if it's on the west, well, then we're just going to take off the dock. We'll be pushed inland a little bit and more out there and ride it out there. But right now, we're still tied off at the dock. We're almost practically on the bottom right now. It's just all the water is just leaving right now.
Wow. So why are you deciding to stay there?
Well, you know, we just re-outfitted our boat. It's a great boat, and she can handle it. We did a lot of preparation to make sure it's going to go right. You know, we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. It's all going to work out. We got a good team of captains out here. How
are you getting updates while on the boat?
We're doing it. We're doing it by our phones, by the radio. A lot of communication going on right now, primarily with the phones and the radio, and then we have our ship shorts, stuff like that.
Okay, so you sound winded. So what kind of work are you doing to ensure that you and your boat make it through this?
We're just right now. What we're doing is just kind of monitoring the lines that our boat's docked with. We have many lines on the boat, and we're just establishing those, making sure that we have the right tension on them. Everything's setting real good, and she's setting real good. It's a great boat. It's bulletproof. So, nevertheless, right now we're just starting to get busy because it just started deteriorating not too long ago, actually.
Captain, we're looking at live images of Miami right now taking on a lot of water as the storm surge there has dumped a lot of water right there, downtown Miami. When you start to see these reports and as I tell you what I'm seeing in these images, do you have any regrets about doing what you're doing and riding out this storm?
Not really. We always have a plan B and stuff like that. We're pretty well off out here. Like I said, we're not putting anybody in harm's way. We got a pretty secure vessel. We got a pretty good plan here. We're on the inside. You know, I'm sorry for the people in Miami and everybody got hit down the Keys. You know, prayers go out to them. I wish them the best. And, well, I just hope everybody makes it.
All right. Captain Jeff Ballard, thanks for coming on. Stay safe.
Okay,
please.
You're welcome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bill?
Sandra, as you were talking there, we heard two loud booms in the distance here in Orlando. Not quite sure what they were. They could have been transformers blowing, but it's hard for us to really know. We still have power. The electricity's been on, has not been knocked off, despite some reports we're getting south of town in Kissimmee, Florida, where they lost power about 2 hours ago. But, you know, the gusts are kicking around here, and this is about what we expected. It's around 7:30 in the evening. The sun's going down, and this is really, it fits the time and the schedule that we were told several hours ago about when we could expect to feel the first bands of Irma here, and now that's happening. As for the White House, the president's back there tonight. He and the Vice President Mike Pence reassuring a lot of people in the track of Irma that they will have the full support of the government. In fact, they met with cabinet members to get an update on the track of the storm. And here's the Vice President Mike Pence from a few hours ago on that.
We are with you. The prayers of the American people are with the people of Florida. And secondly, as the President said, our mission here at the federal level in support of local efforts is very simple. Wherever Hurricane Irma goes, we'll be there first. We'll be there with resources and support, both to save lives and to help to recover and rebuild these states and these communities.
So now I want to get to Kristen Fisher live at the White House. Kristen, tell us what the Trump administration right now, what they're doing, and how they're reacting to help people impacted by this storm. Good evening to you.
Good evening, Bill. Well, within the last few hours, President Trump has approved a major disaster declaration for the entire state of Florida. And what that will do is free up federal funds for state and local authorities to rebuild and repair all of the damaged infrastructure. It'll also free up federal funds for individuals and business owners, things like grants for temporary housing or home repairs, even some low-cost loans to cover perhaps some uninsured property losses. As for exactly how much money we're talking about, too soon to say. President Trump says right now they're still focused on saving lives and not how much this hurricane is going to cost.
We may have been a little bit lucky in that it went on the west, and it may not have been quite as destructive, but we're going to see. Look, it's going to play out over the next 5 or 6 hours. I'm going in now for meetings, but it's all about coordination. I think we're really well coordinated, as well as you can possibly be.
Now, President Trump made those remarks right after landing at the White House after spending the weekend at Camp David with his cabinet. The White House says he's been monitoring this storm 24/7. He's been on the phone with Florida's senators, Florida's governor, and the governors of the states where Irma is headed next: Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And, you know, add that to the devastation caused by Hurricane Harvey in Texas and Louisiana, and you can see why Florida Senator Bill Nelson has been saying that FEMA is stretched. But the acting head of the Department of Homeland Security, speaking today at FEMA's headquarters, she said today that she's confident that the federal government is going to be able to simultaneously respond and handle the aftermaths of both Hurricane Harvey and Irma, Bill.
We're going to talk to Senator Nelson next hour about that very topic, Kristen. What about, well, we saw the president in Houston after Harvey. Was he asked about plans to come to Florida? And what did he say?
Yeah, he was, and he said his exact words were, "I'm going to be going to Florida very soon." He was in Texas within days of Hurricane Harvey. Then he went back to Houston once it was safe for him to go there, once he wasn't going to tie up too many resources, the kind of resources that are required anytime a president goes into a disaster zone. But President Trump, he says he's going to be going to Florida as soon as possible. And, you know, this is a state that President Trump has often called his second home. He has several properties there. And, of course, the Winter White House, Mar-a-Lago, is there as well. So this is a very personal storm for him as president, as he watches what happens to a state that he knows and loves very well, Bill.
Yeah, all right, Kristen, we will await more word on that. Kristen Fisher, thank you so much, reporting on the latest from the White House there with us tonight. Winds from the east right now, Sandra. You can feel it coming our way here in Orlando, and it's going to deteriorate throughout the evening as our coverage continues.
You can feel it, Bill, and we can hear it. Thank you for your continued coverage out there. Stay tuned for continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma as it continues to make its way up the Florida coast. We'll get the latest update on the storm track and talk to one of the many families forced to leave home.
Back in Orlando, I'm Bill Hemmer. Good evening. This is the Fox Report, continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma bearing down on Florida. Now, Category 2 storm carving a path of destruction up the Gulf Coast, and torrential rainfall hitting so many towns along the way. Winds maxing out right now at 110 miles an hour. Here is what it looked like at daybreak. Florida Keys, Irma causing a 10-foot storm surge. Authorities urging people to get away from the water at that moment.
Storm surge has the highest potential to kill the most amount of people and cause the most amount of damage. And so, you know, my biggest concern is when people fail to heed a warning early from local government officials, and then they make a last-minute ditch to try to get to a shelter or into a facility to withstand the winds. And in some cases, the water starts to rise and they get trapped because they didn't heed the warning early, and that's my greatest concern.
Well, a big concern throughout the state. Adam Klotz back in the Fox Extreme Weather Center. And Adam, so you know, we're feeling her here in Orlando. She has arrived. Good evening. What do you see on the radar?
Hey, good evening there, Bill. For the last hour or so, we've been seeing Fort Myers getting slammed by the eye wall, really moving across that area. I can bring you in here. Now, it has begun to pass through there, but it's this area where the winds are going to be the strongest. There's your eye wall. You see Fort Myers just now beginning to get to the south of that. So they've really been getting it here in the last hour or so. Naples got it a while ago. That's now farther to the south, so things are beginning to improve for them. But everyone out in front of this, everyone beginning to see more and more severe weather. These are all very heavy thunderstorms, embedded thunderstorms. And within some of these, we've had a couple of tornadoes spin up in the last several hours. Everything you're looking at in the red, that's a tornado watch in place because the conditions are there. But generally on the front right side of these storms, that's where those tornadoes spin up. That's been the case all of today as we see a tornado warned storm just outside of the Orlando area. Also one just north of Daytona Beach. These will continue to fire up throughout the overnight hours, especially on the eastern side of the state. So even though the track of this thing's running up the west side of the state, that does not mean you're out of the woods if you're on the east side of the state. The winds have been very strong. Look at this, 142 in Naples as it moved through the area. That was just about an hour ago. Marco Island up to 130 miles an hour. These winds are going to stay this strong as this storm runs up the west side of the state. Look at this. And there's been a lot of folks who think, hey, I'm not there on the west side of the state. Maybe the winds won't be as bad. Everything you're looking at in this red area, that is a hurricane force wind. Everything in the orange area, which you see includes Orlando, stretches all the way to the coast, that is a hurricane force gust. So absolutely everyone across the state has this opportunity as this system continues to lift to the north. Actually, we're going to be talking about some very strong winds getting into Atlanta by late tomorrow night, lingering you into early Tuesday morning. The other big concern, and anytime you talk about all these big winds, is going to be the storm surge. Now that we're moving just north of Fort Myers, these numbers are going to start to climb. 10 to 15 potential feet there, 5 to 10 feet in Tampa. Again, it's when you get on the backside of this storm that that water really begins to climb. 15 feet, again, that's not a wave. That's just the base level of the water, and that's why this is so severe. Bill?
Adam, thank you. Adam Klotz there. We had a tornado warning here that expired about 45 minutes ago, and we've had several of those throughout the day today already. Adam, thanks. We'll be back with you next hour. Sandra, it's an amazing thing to see this storm cover the entire width of the state of Florida. They said it would be that big, and in fact it is here tonight.
Pretty
back to
much
you in New York.
Everyone and every city in that state affected by this, Bill, and curfews are going on into effect across the state right now, including in Miami. Violent winds there from Irma, knocking down a pair of construction cranes there. This one smashed into a building downtown. No reports of any injuries. Brian Yanis is reporting live from Miami. Brian, there is a curfew in Miami tonight for people that stayed there. Are they following that?
Yes, from what we can see, they are. A curfew starting at 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And the reason is, well, take a look at this. This is the Panorama building. This is now the largest building in Miami being constructed at 84 stories tall, a residential building. It's been getting just whipped by the wind since the storm coming from the southwest with those winds. Guy, take a look at this. This is what's been falling from that building. These are 6-foot long glass panels falling from up to 85 stories tall across the street. This is the sixth one we've seen fall from that building. This is what the third one we've seen on the ground, and it's just tons of shards of glass that we've seen throughout the area. This is why officials do not want people on the streets, because frankly, the time in which you can probably get hurt the most is right after the storm. There are still tons of debris around. The city of Miami is sending out 5 recovery crews, essentially debris crews, to see how much debris is on the is to evaluate the entire city to see what they have to do to clean up the area. I am bringing you now onto Brickell Avenue in downtown Miami. This is where we're starting, where we're seeing the effects of that storm surge. We are right by the water. These are residential high-rises, the JW Marriott as well, and you can just see the flooding. This is about ankle-deep water, and you can tell it goes all the way down, see, as far as our light can go. Now, the good news is that many of the buildings here seem to be elevated, so the water doesn't seem to have made it past the steps in many of these cases, but there are residents here. This area was under mandatory evacuation, and for good reason, because it is easily flooded. And when Irma was coming and initially was supposed to have a direct hit on Miami, we were talking 6 to 10 foot storm surge. Luckily, we haven't seen that here, but still flooding, which can cause a lot of problems. Your car can get stuck, power lines can get down, and when you have glass panels falling off of a building and sharp glass on the ground, it's just a recipe for danger and just not good. So a lot of people like to come out in the storms to take photos. Authorities are saying stay in. We're still not done yet. Sandra.
And Brian, as we just heard, the Miami International Airport is reporting still 99-mile-per-hour wind gusts. So that's still the case right there. But can you put some of this in perspective for us, Brian? You're from there. You've covered multiple hurricanes in the past. The type of flooding that you're seeing right now.
You know, the last hurricane that I was here for, I covered Hurricane Matthew, but that scraped us up and didn't really affect Miami as much. Hurricane Wilma is the comparison that we have, Category 3. I stayed in bunkered down with my family. That storm kind of hovered and hit us twice, wrapped around and hit us twice. That caused a lot of damage, and I think that's a fairly good comparison in the sense that this storm has lasted a long time, and even if you don't have the 130-mile-an-hour gusts, you still have that storm surge. You still have those winds, and we've seen down power lines and signs down, and just, you know, over time, we saw a stop sign last night. We've been covering this since 10 o'clock last night, and it's just, you know, you see it. It just came right down. It just kept getting hit and hit and hit. I think a lot of people were prepared for this storm, no doubt, but when it started moving to the west, there was a little bit of concern that people were letting their guard down, and I think we're seeing right now why officials were concerned about that. This is fairly significant damage. We have 800,000 people that don't have power. It's going to take a while for things to get back to normal here, and that's why they're stressing patience. And with Wilma, we were without power in my home for 2 weeks. Some people were without power for 4 weeks. And I know FPL has done everything they can to make sure that isn't the case now. We already saw a power crew go into that building as we hear the fire alarms go off. It looks like they're assessing the power situation while they can. Remember, they can't put those buckets in the air when the wind is above 35 miles an hour. So again, patience. We are still getting those wicked gusts coming right off the ocean, which is about a 3-minute walk that way, Sandra.
All right, Brian Yanis, yes, we certainly can hear those emergency alarms and sirens going off as the floodwaters there continue to rise. The wind's still strong there. Meanwhile, the rest of the state is bracing for what's next. Bill Hemmer in Orlando. Bill?
Sandra, they told 6 million people to leave their homes and get on the road and get out of here. And there's a family with me now that's part of that 6 million. Mike and Dorothy Morocco and their kids with me here tonight as well. Their daughter Angela goes to school here in Orlando, their son Joseph in the back. I saw you guys on the elevator. I saw you in the restaurant. I've seen you everywhere for the past day. You live in Clearwater, Florida? Near there?
Just north of Clearwater.
Palm Harbor?
Palm Harbor.
And you made the decision to leave yesterday. What was that final push that got you to get up and come?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was a nightmare. Like most Floridians, we were following the track for the last 5 days, and originally, of course, it was on the East Coast. So we thought, okay, we'll keep an eye on it. And then after track started moving west, Saturday morning at 5 o'clock, when the track started to really kind of look like it was going into the Gulf, that was the big concern. So I basically woke everyone up at 5 a.m. and said we have to get out.
So he woke you up when?
At 5 o'clock and said we're leaving.
And I was real fortunate to get a reservation that morning. I mean, everything was sold out here. So.
And I've remarked several times about how patient the people here in Orlando. I mean, they have really been great to us. How do you feel riding this hurricane out tonight?
I feel good. It's better than being home, I feel like, even though it was hard to leave.
Yeah.
We're safer here.
You feel that way, is that right? Dorothy, and you were talking about during the commercial break as well. You did not want to stay, but you have seen many hurricanes here in Florida. What was it for you that said, I can't take a chance?
Mike, when he woke up and said we're leaving, we listened to him and packed up and left. And we had unfortunately, we have family back home in Palm Harbor.
Okay. And are you in touch with them?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And have you heard, how are they doing?
They're okay. They're okay. They still have electricity, so they're okay.
My man, don't lose your hat back there, you know?
I'll try not to.
Okay. How are you feeling here, you know, throughout the day? And as you know that she is soon arriving.
I feel good. It's just a little cold and windy. But other than that, doing good.
Only fools like us are supposed to be out here, not like you guys, all right? The Morocco family, thank you for being here and letting our viewers know how you're doing, all right? Be well, and we'll see what we get tonight, okay?
Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone throughout the storm area.
I second that. Thank you. Sandra, back to you in New York. Thanks, guys. Good luck.
All right, that family sticking together. Bill Hemmer, thank you for that, and nice to hear from a family that fled to safety. As soon as this storm ends, the recovery officially begins. FEMA officials now ready and waiting to take on the task. How they are preparing to meet the monumental challenge that lies ahead, even as Hurricane Irma continues to create more damage at this very minute.
Well, we know these storms are putting a real stretch on the federal government and FEMA. Certainly, you had Harvey in Texas and now Irma here throughout the state of Florida as they gear up to respond to the destruction and what comes after this storm. Vice President Mike Pence and fellow cabinet members traveling today to FEMA headquarters in Washington, checking in on what's happening there. That agency now getting ready with resources and personnel to help Florida and any other areas that may sustain a lot of damage from this storm. Garrett Tenney's live from FEMA headquarters in Washington. And Garrett, what did you hear from officials today about what concerns them the most about what they're watching here in Florida?
Well, Bill, earlier this evening when I was speaking with the acting Homeland Security Secretary, Elaine Duke, she told me that the area they are most concerned about is still South Florida. And the reason is because there are a lot of folks there who did not evacuate and now need to be rescued. But in a lot of areas, the conditions are still so bad that search and rescue teams can't get out to conduct those operations. And that's why this afternoon, when Vice President Mike Pence was here, he urged folks, if you're still able to evacuate, get out.
We can rebuild cities. We can rebuild buildings. We cannot rebuild lives. And saving lives is the priority of all of us, from the President to Governor Scott on down. And we'll stay focused on the life-saving mission. But it all begins with Americans in harm's way, listening to state and local officials.
And right now, the hope is that they will be able to start those search and rescue operations in South Florida, particularly the Florida Keys, first thing tomorrow morning. And from there, as the storm continues to work its way north, they will also be able to start conducting those operations further up in the state. Now, to help with that, FEMA is working with the Department of Defense to use some of their assets in the Gulf so that as soon as the storm passes, they can move in and have those ships with supplies and teams ready to get help to those folks that need it. But again, until the water calms down, those ships can't make it. So sadly, for now, those folks who didn't evacuate and need to be rescued, they'll have to be on their own at least until tomorrow morning. Bill.
Yeah, big job ahead. Garrett Tenney, thank you so much at FEMA headquarters there in Washington. We'll talk to Senator Bill Nelson from Florida next hour about the response there from the federal level. That's west, that's east, that's south, that's north. And from the east is where the bands are now whipping around here in Orlando as Irma continues to march here toward the north. They will deteriorate throughout the night, Sandra. We certainly know that as the storm gets closer and closer. And we're going to keep an eye very closely on Fort Myers, Florida, and also Tampa. And we'll see what we get throughout the night here. But just a tick before 8 o'clock here in Orlando for now. Back to you in New York, Sandra. We'll talk to you again in a couple minutes.
All right, Bill Hemmer, thank you. Meanwhile, more than 2 million people are without power in Florida, and a large number of those people are in Broward County. Joining me now is Broward County Mayor Barbara Sharif. Mayor, thanks for joining us right now. So just how many of your residents are without power at the moment?
About 709,000.
And your county has a population of about 2 million.
Yes.
So you're talking about you're moving towards almost half of your population without power. What can you tell residents as far as how long to expect that to last?
So basically, FPL has the largest mobilization in the history of a storm in the United States right now in Broward County, with over 14,000 workers in place. And strategically placed equipment. I think that we're well on our way to getting power restored to many of those residents quickly and safely. What our biggest concern is that because of the number of residents without power, that people will go out and wade into water that has electrical lines in it and then cause electrocution deaths, and that's a problem for us.
Yeah, and that seems to be one of the big goals of local officials, to say, even though it might look like the situation is improving, that does not mean you should walk outside of your house. What are you expecting as far as rainfall? By the most recent forecast, 8 to 10 inches of heavy rain is expected in your county.
So as of today, when we got our last update at 3, we had 4 to 8 inches in areas around Broward County, and up until 8:30 or 9 o'clock tonight, it's projected that another 4 to 8 inches will fall. So we'll be well over 8 to 16 inches of rain by the time tomorrow gets here.
Wow, and considering your community has coastal areas as well as low-lying areas, what do you expect in terms of flooding?
Well, they've been reporting that all of the coastal areas are flooded. Hollandale, Hollywood, Fort Lauderdale Beach, that we have lots of flooding over in those areas, especially in the areas where we evacuated people east of Federal Highway and US 1. We're experiencing a high volume of flooding.
And what are you hearing in terms of your residents and how they're faring at this moment?
So people are reporting that they're without power, of course, but most people, for the most part, are okay. They're safe and sheltered in place, and that was our goal with the early evacuation and with the curfew. We were just hoping that they would heed the warning and get in place.
Mayor, as of a little while ago, a boil water order was put out for the town of Davie. I believe in your county, a system-wide precautionary boil water order. What can you tell us about that?
So right now we have 5 cities out of the 31 with boil water orders. There are Hollywood, Davie, West Park, Pembroke Pines, and Hallandale Beach.
Why was this order put in place?
Some of the functions at some of the water plants that service those systems in those cities failed, and so they put out a cautionary boil water alert for those 5 cities.
All right. And as far as curfew tonight, you have a curfew in place, and you expect that to be in place all the way through Monday?
Yes. Our curfew went into place at 4 p.m. yesterday, and that's going to last until 10 a.m. on Monday. Now, just because we released the curfew at 10 a.m. does not mean we want people out in the streets at 10 o'clock in the morning.
All right. Broward County Mayor Barbara Sharif, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Bill Hemmer.
Sandra, more continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma here. Live report from Tampa in a moment here. We'll get a live report out of Naples. I'll let you know how we're tracking the storm through Fort Myers and certainly here in Orlando. We are a long way from finished with a Category 2 storm still moving up the Florida spine. Back in a moment, live in Orlando on this Fox Report.
Hurricane Irma hitting hard in the state of Florida. The storm knocking out power to more than 2.5 million homes and businesses as authorities warn of potentially lethal storm surge. Welcome to the Fox Report. I'm Sandra Smith. Bill Hemmer is in Orlando tonight. Hey, Bill.
Great to be with you tonight, Sandra, and good evening to everybody at home watching and waiting to see what Irma does next. I can tell you here in Orlando, Irma's arrived, and these winds out of the east, they're picking up by the moment here, hour by hour now as the storm gets closer. Really a remarkable thing when you think of where we were yesterday and where we were at daybreak today and how large this storm was in the Keys and how it moved its way toward Naples and made impact there, and now it's moving on Fort Myers and still has such a long stretch to go. We woke up this morning at a Category 4. It made landfall in the Keys at that level. Then it went to Naples at a Category 3. It's been downgraded to a Category 2, but still very dangerous, packing 110-mile-an-hour winds. And we've got a long night ahead of us. We are just at the beginning of this here in this part of the state. Team Fox coverage now. This hour, Mike Tobin is to the west in Tampa, but I want to start with meteorologist Adam Klotz back in the Fox Extreme Weather Center to bring us up to date on what's happening right now and what we expect. And Adam, good evening again.
Hey, good evening, Bill. Continuing to track this as it moves right up the coast. The community most recently hit hard. We're talking about the Fort Myers area. That's the outer wall just to the north there. So the really, really strong winds likely just moving through that area, maybe beginning to get just a bit of a break at the moment. But they just saw some real powerful storms move through the area. Everything to the north of that, the entire state of Florida, you're looking at tornado watches in place. The conditions are there to see some tornadic activity, and we have seen it here in the last several hours. especially on the eastern side of the state. That's generally where this happens, on the front right quadrant of a hurricane. That's where you see some tornadoes spin up, and that's been the case. There's one way up north there towards the Jacksonville area, but we've seen them fire up throughout the Orlando area throughout the afternoon hours. Still wouldn't be surprised if we saw more of that as we continue on into the overnight hours. Let's put this thing into motion for you. Here's your future radar. There's your center of circulation down to the south. Pay attention to it as it lifts to the north. We're looking at really getting into 1 a.m. by the time we're moving on through from midnight to 1 through the Tampa area. These outer bands continuing to lift to the north, but that's where that center of circulation is. As you get on past that, you get into 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, things may begin to calm down in the Tampa area, but all the winds suddenly shift. And as the winds are coming out of the west, it's going to grab all that water, and that's when you start to see the storm surge be a problem. So really early tomorrow morning is when storm surge becomes the worst for the Tampa area, and that's one of their biggest threats. So even as this passes us by, it does not mean this system is over. It'll continue to climb to the north as you get going into early Monday morning. What are our concerns going to continue to be? Well, additional rainfall. This isn't including what we've already seen, but you're looking fairly widespread, spots getting another 6, in some cases 8 inches of total precipitation on top of what we've already seen. That's not including the storm surge, so that's another way we could flood. Winds are going to stay strong. These are some recent wind totals. 142 miles an hour. I expect we're going to continue to see very strong winds. And yes, obviously that storm surge I mentioned, that's going to be a really big one, especially 10 to 15 feet, 5 to 10 feet. We're still going to be dealing with this all the way until tomorrow. Bill.
All right, I'll take it from there. Bill will get his shot back up in just a second. Meanwhile, it has been almost 100 years since a major hurricane hit Tampa. That's all changing now. Hurricane Irma charging towards the Tampa Bay area, home to about 3 million people. Mike Tobin is live in Tampa, where we spoke with the mayor earlier, Mike, and he was saying that his biggest concern at this point is going to be the storm surge.
Yeah, and that is what starts tomorrow. What we're seeing immediately, though, certainly in the last hour since we talked to you, is that the rain has become rather significant. It's coming down in sheets and sheets. We're also seeing a big increase in the wind, and we're seeing the first bits of debris that is being knocked down by the wind. You can see the palm fronds, branches blown off trees. I want to point out, Sven, if you could look up to that house, here's something significant, Sandra. Power is still on in this area, certainly that we're seeing in Tampa. But you can see the wind blowing around the palm trees. In fact, if you look out to the street, that's Bayshore Boulevard, the street lights are still on. Looking down here, there's so much rain coming down that the water is now rushing down the street. You talk about the concern with the storm surge. I'm reluctant to call this rain runoff flooding, because that's not the big flood event that the officials out here are losing sleep over. What they're worried about is the storm surge that will come in on the heels of this, on the back end of this storm sometime tomorrow. But in the immediate right now, in our immediate present, if I should say, I want you to look down Bayshore Boulevard, because you should be able to get a good picture of just the extent to which the rain is now coming down. Sheet after sheet of rain. The wind is picking up a little bit right now. You should be able to see the palm trees blowing around. We're definitely into that tropical storm force winds. It really doesn't feel like we're into hurricane force winds at this stage of the game. The crew and I now, Sandra, are getting ready to retreat back to the other side of the Hillsborough River. That's because our safe space, if you will, is on the other side of the river, where we intend to be when things get really bad. As it's picking up now, it's time for us to pick up and move shortly at the end of this live shot. But looking around, you can see everything that's going on with the developments, the increase in the wind. As the pressure goes down, we get closer to the center of this storm. The trees are blowing around. I can also point you out toward the Hillsborough Bay. That's where we saw that dramatic effect of all of the water that had drawn out to join the storm surge, and predictably, at least the predictions say, it's going to come rushing back into the bay with such a vengeance and so much additional volume that it's going to come some 10 to 15 feet up over the normal sea levels. That can put these type of areas and all of the low-lying areas underwater. That is why the officials out here made such a point of placing the mandatory evacuations into Zone A, everything 11 feet and below, across across Tampa Bay and Pinellas County. They put the mandatory evacuation into effect for zones A and B. That's everything 15 feet and below. They told people to get out. Now, however, the authorities have changed the story. They say it's too late. If you haven't made your evacuation, now is the time to batten down the hatches, hunker down. You're in for a long couple days. And sadly, it means the same thing for the people who have retreated to the shelters. The shelters aren't pleasant places to be. They're with kids. The kids are going to start getting fussy, but you can't necessarily return. We've got the big wind event coming tonight, and you can't return as soon as the wind event is over. You've got the flooding after that, and then they want the officials to come out here, have a look around, make sure it's safe for people to return to their homes. Sandra?
Mike, great point, because when we spoke to the Tampa mayor earlier, he said he had already stopped sending his first responders, police, firemen. He stopped sending them out. Winds over 40 miles per hour, he's not sending them out. Mike Tobin, thank you. Stay safe.
Got it.
All right, now to Bill
Sandra,
Hemmer in
we
Orlando.
can feel it here as well. Yeah, and you know, you're talking about the rain with Adam a short time ago, and there's going to be such a great amount of water that's going to drop on the city of Orlando throughout the night tonight, and also where Mike Tobin is. He's about 80 miles to our west here, just down the I-4 corridor. I want to bring in Senator Bill Nelson from Florida on the phone. And, sir, you were in Tampa earlier. I think you're in Orlando now, and you're feeling what we're feeling, certainly. Give us your sense of the concerns you have tonight and the, well, really the early stages for this part of Florida experiencing Irma, Senator.
Well, first of all, I'm very, very proud of Floridians. They obeyed the evacuation orders. They're very orderly in the various refuge points. But what we are, fortunately, the hurricane is weakening a little bit over land. But, Bill, I'm back in Orlando now, along with you are, and you're feeling the effects of these outer bands that are still quite strong in the northeast quadrant, well ahead of the eye, which is down there somewhere north of Fort Myers right now.
Yeah. Senator, when you consider the damage in Texas from Harvey, and when you start to consider the extent of the damage in Florida, this storm has shot up the spine of your state, and we'll see tomorrow at daybreak after she passes to find out, well, what's left and who was hit the hardest. What is your level of confidence about getting the help that you need?
We'll get it. FEMA is stretched, no doubt. They held back people from going to Texas so they could pre-position them to go into Florida. In Hillsborough County over in Tampa, they've got FEMA people already there, so they're pre-positioned. But, Bill, that $15 billion that we just passed a few days ago, that's going to last just a few weeks. When you consider the amount of damage done in Texas and Florida, it'll run out mid-October. We'll have to go back with another emergency appropriations bill.
Well, and that will happen sometime very soon, sir. I'm sure we'll have that debate then. But as for tonight, you need to get through a long night here. And when you describe those winds in the northeast quadrant, that's what you're feeling. We still have power. That's a pretty good thing here. But the tropical force winds are picking up by the moment, and we're going to see how this goes. Sir, you were watching our coverage, I'm certain, throughout the day here. What did you think, being a Floridian and a pilot as well, and an astronaut for that matter, watching this radar literally cover the entire state of Florida as we watch it here tonight?
That's right, and it basically still is. The southern tip, the Keys are beginning to emerge from all the rain bands, but the entire remaining part of the state is covered up all the way over to Tallahassee as we speak. And I'll never forget looking at this right now on the radar. I'll never forget looking out the window of our spacecraft 31 years ago, and I looked down on a hurricane. It was one in the southern hemisphere, so its rotation was clockwise instead of counterclockwise. It was over the Indian Ocean, and it's just a massive storm with all of these swirling clouds, and that's what is covering up virtually the whole state of Florida right now.
Yeah, I bet it's a beautiful thing from space, but it's a hell of a thing to go through on the ground. And millions are experiencing that now. Senator, good luck. We'll speak again very soon. Bill Nelson, the Democratic senator here from Florida, riding this out through Orlando tonight. Sandra, on we go. Irma's here. Back to you in New York.
Things changing by the minute, Bill. And right now, Irma pummeling Florida with hurricane force winds. But authorities pointing out the biggest danger comes from potential storm surge. We're going live on the ground in Naples next, where they're bracing for a potential 15-foot wall of water.